Hello everyone, my YouTube fam. It's been a while since I posted anything new, so I thought it was about time. And yes, as tradition for me would hold, it's a little bit rainy here in New York, so a good day to paint. Okay, topic for today, a little bit ambitious in some ways, but I'm going to try to make that the topic of today. How to take something that looks pretty difficult or ambitious and edit it, not just in terms of content, although yes, that, but in terms of approach to make it more doable, more bite-sized in a way. So anyway, what we have here is a view from a window at what you can easily see is a busy urban skyline. Where this is beautiful Paris. I was there a little while ago, and from one of the windows of my room, this is part of what I could see. So why paint this, or what is it I'm trying to do? What's my intention? Which is what I always ask all of my groups, all of my students. First thing, what's your intention? Why do you want to paint this? Why do you want to paint at all? And assuming you do, what is it you want to paint? I think asking yourself, why do you want to paint at all is, obviously very personal, but it gets to the heart of your aesthetic. What are the kinds of things that appeal to you? And what is it you want to express about them? So what I like about this is, as always, I try not to just paint a scene, but I try to paint that intention within the scene, the emotional experience that the scene may have in me, the painter, and hopefully something similar or perhaps very different in you, the viewer. But it's Paris, traditionally a very beautiful, romantic city. There's so much truth to that, although a lot of it we sort of layer on to our feelings about Paris because of tradition, but it's truth in advertising. It's not untrue. The time of day, this was afternoon, but I want to change that, so that's another thing I want to talk about. As always, is how to take what it is you're looking at and then reinvent it, redesign it, if you will, to be a little bit more accurate as to what you're seeing. And by that I mean what you're feeling or what your intention is. I love this sort of collision of shapes and oddly positioned windows, chimney stacks, different materials clashing. I think that's all very appealing. But one thing, of course, I noticed was there's one window that's open and every other window is closed. Now, obviously, I or you or anyone could, if we're drawing an urban scene like this, we could choose to leave a closed window open if we want. This one just happened to be open, and that was kind of my hook. I thought that was very compelling. All these windows are closed, and it makes an obvious barrier to whatever may be going on inside. This one was open, so it was like a look into someone's life a little bit. So I started to build the idea of a painting around that, where this would become my center of focus. This odd streak was just a light reflection from my window that was open, so that can just be ignored. So then I thought about a view something like this, where we crop in a little tighter. So there's no ground plane showing, of course. So this is just looking up slightly at this really interesting skyline. Then I thought it would be a little bit more communicative if we turn this into an evening view. So I started doing a sketch, and I'll finish that now. So this is the similar scene, but just cropped in a bit tighter. And then this one open window will sort of be the star of my show, my focal area, focal point in this case. Horizon line Doesn't matter too much, but it would be pretty much at this person's eye line, which was similar to mine across the way, across the street, looking out. And yeah, so again, cropping up from the bottom, having the visual information tightest here with the most color, the most resolution, much of the lightest and darkest values. And then the information radiating out from that will become less detailed, less saturated, and while maybe not less important, less focal. Then I had the idea that maybe this should be done as an evening view. And that would be another interesting thing I hope to talk about in terms of painting. Ways of approaching evening views. The skies, even in full-on nighttime views, do not have to be jet black. They can be, but very often skies, not just in urban areas, but rural too, pick up a lot of color from the sun that's way below the horizon. But the point is, the saturation of the sky is much less than you might think sometimes. Skies can be quite bright, even at night, or relatively bright anyway. What makes it in a painting feel like it's nighttime, I think, is the anything that intersects visually the sky, anything that pokes up above the horizon. So in this case, buildings, urban skylights, skyline. In a more rural setting, trees, rocks. If they are darker than the sky, that's where I'm going with this. If those elements read as darker than the sky, then your whole view will read as nighttime, even if the sky itself is quite light. So I'm thinking also of giving this whole painting a sort of a dominantly blue palette, which also often speaks of evening. It's a cool tone, it's a quieter color. It'll all just hopefully dovetail together to emphasize the intention and the story. So here, I want to add some tone to the sky, but I want this really complicated and interesting skyline that juts up and intersects the sky to be very busy and darker than the sky behind, which will give the whole painting an overall evening vibe. In watercolor, it's really a matter of what it is you don't paint as much as what you do paint. The light, of course, all comes from the surface of the paper. So deciding before you start painting what's going to be your darkest elements, what are going to be the lightest, is pretty critical. Not a lot of real light in this painting, but what there will be pretty important to making the composition work. I want to save this open window pretty nearly until the end as completely unpainted. I'm thinking of, if it doesn't eat up too much light, I'm thinking of indicating a figure, perhaps standing in the window, just to emphasize my sentimental little story here. So no other windows will be as bright. Some will be a little lighter because of just for variety's sake as much as anything, but you know, there are window blinds or draperies behind certain windows, so even at night they're going to look a little lighter, but I'm not trying to be accurate as much to what I'm looking at as I'm trying to be accurate to the emotional resonance or feeling. So just for the sake of variety, I'll make some of these other windows quite dark, others not as dark, some a little bit light, but nothing as light as this. If this, as far as a color story, if blue is dominantly the palette I'm going to use, I think a few minimal but well-placed highlights of yellow-orange as a complement to the blue will be a good option. So in this open window, there'll be some bits I think I'll save as completely unpainted, and some I'll probably make in the orangish yellow family. And hopefully just those little jewel tones that I might use here will offset the blues elsewhere in the painting. So what I'm doing now is just playing around with the composition. I think could be square, which would be a nice settled and quiet kind of look, or it might be ever so slightly vertical. Not 100% sure. I think I'll wait till I draw it up on the final paper and then make a final decision then. But I'm playing around with the various values. Again, this will be my center of focus. So most of the lightest values, probably all of the lightest values, and much of the darkest values in the painting will happen here or just around here. And then also because it's evening, but also to emphasize the center of focus, the rest of the painting will be a little less distinct, a little fuzzier, or not necessarily out of focus, but less contrasty, less hard-edged. Yeah, so generally speaking, the darkest darks and lightest lights will happen in this area. My ones, which I call the lights. My 3 values, which I call the darks. Almost everything else will be some version of a mid-tone, number 2. I try to build up a sense of depth and perspective in my work, not just by constructing linear perspective, but by layering values, establishing a foreground, a midground, a background. Here, the focal length is pretty contained. There's obviously a sky is in the background. Much of this is in the midground. There's no real foreground element, and I kind of like that. I think it'll help emphasize the story to the viewer when the painting is done, pushing all the visual information a little bit away from the viewer, inviting them, I hope, to look and discover what's in there. But I can see I'm going to need to manipulate some values so I don't end up with an overall flat painting, which I don't want. Again, there's not a lot of implied depth. Much of these architectural elements happen in the same plane, so these roof shapes fall behind, so they'll be a little less distinct than these, but it's a fairly contained perspective. So what I'm doing here is more than anything just trying to be comfortable with the formatting and how tight I'm cropping it or not to see if that feels good. And yeah, I think it does. I think I ought to indicate a few of these lower level windows just so that you understand that you're looking up at a roofscape without showing the whole building or the ground down below. Yeah, should be okay. So I'm just going to sketch this on the paper, and again, I may make some adjustments to the formatting, but probably that's about it. I get asked a lot, do I use straight edges to draw straight lines on my paper? Often I don't at all, but sometimes I might do what I'm doing here, which is I used a straight edge to drop in just a few lines. These lines may not actually represent any specific thing, but I can freehand over them or next to them or nearby, and that just helps me regulate and keep most of the visual information looking straight. I can draw a pretty straight line completely freehand, but I dropped in a few little training wheels, I guess you could call them, for myself. All right, so I'm going to start in by, this I think would represent this roof line of this lead roof. So I'll start in by dropping in the focal window, which is just about here. So a little off center, which I think in this case makes sense. Compositionally, we're about a third of the way up from the bottom and roughly a third of the way in from this side. So for all of you classical composition fans out there, the rule of thirds, I don't find it fixed, but it's a bit of a fail-safe. You can't go too wrong. And things do look a little more comfortable when you consider that. There are many times, I've done it all the time, where you want to put something focal right dead center. But this is not one of those times. I want it a little off center. Oh, paper, I'm using an Arches 140 pound, 300 gram rough surface, Arches bright white. And my sketch pencil are these fantastic Blackwings. This is a Palomino, the white. I may use a couple of different ones, but this one, I just happened to grab it. It was lying right there. So already I'm starting to get a sense of value-wise how this is going to work. This will be, again, my only area of bright light in the painting. So it's pretty minimal, which tells me I'm going to have to protect it carefully. You know, I have the liberty, if I want to change, add windows or take them out or make things look different, and I will a little bit, but overall I want to be pretty faithful to what I'm seeing here. Just, well, quite frankly, because I just love it. I think it's just this fortunate existing composition of really interesting shapes. And what is painting except shapes? So for example, this little small window right next to the big one, sure, I could change it and leave it out or make it into a big one, or, as I say, not paint it at all, but I just think it looks great and it just happened to be there. So sure, I'll be a little accurate about it. I am going to try to draw this whole thing freehand because I want it to have I want it to be relatively well drawn, but I want it to look a little casual and not too technical. So I don't want to use any more hard lines than a couple of those initial guidelines. But beyond that, I want every line to be freehand, which means here and there they might look a little wonky, and I think that's all to the good. Again, I just think it plays up to this Parisian garret feeling. It looks like the set of La Boheme or something. So I think very hand-done, a little bit of irregularity even is not a bad thing. We very often get so hung up in trying to make things look correct or accurate that we can forget they also have to look expressive and compelling. And in these dreary days of fighting off AI's so-called art, I don't know. I'm more of a defender of the hand-done than I ever was before, so hand-done drawing, it is. Plus, I just love to draw. Recently, it wasn't just one person, but it was several online were commenting about some of my paintings and saying they looked like they were done by AI. And oh gosh, what an attack. How can I go on? No, they're most definitely not done by AI. I admit it's getting harder and harder to tell the difference, but yikes. So again, this is, roughly speaking, the horizon line just right through our open window. If there's a vanishing point, it would be a single vanishing point. I'm really not being very careful about it. It would probably be around here. So the returns on these windows should all radiate from that point, but I'm not being too precise about that either. This beautiful standing seam, a leaded roof, I believe. It just has this beautiful blue-gray patina to it. Great stuff. So all of this, these lower level windows, etc., are just there to anchor the composition. Informationally, they're not that critical, so I'm not going to worry about it too much. Even as I draw them, I'm going to let them fade off the page just a bit. And certainly when I get to the paint stage, they'll be very faded indeed, I expect. As I'm drawing and yakking here, I'm just really considering whether I want to paint this all in tones of blue. I think I'm going to stick with it. I think it'll work. It doesn't mean it'll be 100% blue. I'm going to use some modifiers, some warm, probably ochres or umbers here and there within the fields of blue. I have done paintings all in one color, and blue is one of the ones I sometimes use, but other times, and I think this will be one, a single color painting, a monotoned painting, can look better if you inject some of its complements. So little bits of orange here, as I said earlier, but also throughout, probably bits of ochre and umber that I think will add just a subtle variation or vibration to the relentless blue that I intend to be using. I'll talk more about the specific colors when I get there in a couple of minutes, but I guess it's fairly typical of my process that I just, while I'm doing this stage, I'm thinking very much about the color story. Excuse the sirens. Oh, New York. I'm a little ambivalent, if I'm honest, about putting a figure in the window. I'm wondering if it would be stronger to have no figure at all, but just the open window where you might imagine yourself. So I think what I'll do is just lightly indicate somebody standing here. And then as I develop the drawing further, I'll revisit to determine if I think it's really needed or redundant or a distraction or something. My instinct says it's a good idea, but I can also see where you could make an argument for not putting anything there. And the other thing going through my mind, I might have mentioned it, but since most of the light has to emanate from that little window, a figure, which is naturally going to have to be a little darker, you know, might threaten to dilute that effect. But yeah, I think we'll be okay. So you see here, I did draw very lightly with a straight edge, a vertical here, and it just assists me in being able to more quickly freehand, somewhat near to it, other verticals. So just a little trick you can use if it helps. Some of you won't need it at all. It depends on the kind of painting or drawing you're doing, but using a straight edge can be a benefit, or it can look not as good as you might hope. If you want to do a more technical looking drawing for whatever the reason, that's a perfectly valid thing to want to do. So more absolutely straight edges may be a good thing. But again, I want there to be a decidedly hand-done, slightly wonky overall feeling to this because of the strange geometry, and I guess also just because of the emotional feeling I want this painting to have. A little less than perfect. So yes, when I'm asked about that, as is often the case with every question I'm asked, the answer is some version of, well, it depends, because, well, it does. It depends on the effect you're trying to achieve and what you want the overall feel of your painting to have. So is it wrong to use straight edges? No, but it does depend. It might not be the right thing, and then again, it just might be. I can say little tips if you want to draw a straight line freehand. If you'll notice, I'm pulling my whole arm down and not rotating my wrist too much. So if you do that, it just really assists in drawing a relatively straight line. I'm also standing up, which you can't see, but that helps too, because you can rotate your arm from your shoulder or at least from your elbows, so you draw with more of your whole body, and it makes drawing a straighter looking line a great deal easier than hunkered over the drawing table and just drawing with your fingers. So again, there's all these goofy chimney tops. Here, I think I'll be a little inventive and just make up some. They don't have to be exactly what I'm looking at. This is such a perfect subject for drawing on site, and I wished I had done, but didn't have the chance to do it. But it feels very fresh in my memory, so even using the reference photo feels a little bit like I'm still there, even though I'm clearly not. There's all this stuff, I don't know what it is, but that's kind of good that I don't know. So I'm just looking at shapes that I find interesting, adding them at will if I want to. Okay, so coming over here, I just love this, but I also know that it's further away in the composition and somewhat less important. What's really important, if anything, is this interesting busy skyline. All the specifics down within it are not going to be that visible because it's an evening view, so there will be no bright sun illuminating all those things. So I'll probably just try to indicate some of that information without specifically drawing too much of it. But I really love it, so it's kind of hard to not. It's also hard to not think about how many leaks there must be in these roofs with all these bizarre junction points between all these different pitches and angles and ages, etc. I don't know that this building's particularly ancient, but it does look like it's been there for a while. Wow, very goofy. But those Parisian rooftops that we see in so many films over the years, it's true. They're so fascinating, but so goofy. Ups and downs and ins and outs. So I hope you can see that I'm being at least a little bit sketchier than I was down here, where I was being a little more illustrative. Up here, I'm really concentrating on the bigger shapes and most importantly on this skyline. All these irregular clay chimney pots sticking up at different heights is so traditional, but really is so beautiful. Yeah, that's pretty much all of it that I think is needed. Oh, one little bits, these scrum of little hints of dormers and chimney pots sticking up, I think I should try to include as best I can. I might even invent a few others just to further animate the skyline. So I think overall the composition is filling up most of this sheet. It's a quarter sheet in size, so 15 by 11. Not very big. It's harder to paint bigger than that and still fit it on the camera. And it's not true that a bigger painting is always better, but sometimes painting bigger is a little easier. You have more room for the water to run around and do its thing. So I don't like painting at this size too often. Feels a little constrained, but it's fine. And I think for this sort of sketchy kind of approach, it's not a bad size. Oh, I'm just imagining some antennas and wires and roof junk that's not really there. Not too much of it anyway. Just animating the top. Probably I should stop drawing. I think that's enough information. I love to draw. I always say this because it's true. But I really think your paintings can look better when you draw a little bit less rather than too much. The drawing can become a kind of a crutch. When you start painting, you almost start to paint by numbers and fill in the blanks, and you don't want that look. The drawing in this painting is pretty important, but it's not the main show. So okay, so I think for now that's enough drawing. I'm going to go mix up my paint, and I will be back in a couple minutes.